In the months leading up to the release of Armored Core 6, a big point of debate was whether or not the game would be a Souls-like or a more traditional Armored Core game. Now we have the game in hand, and could have a more informed discussion on that. But semantical debates regarding labels of games sounds boring right now. Armored Core 6 is the best gaming experience I've had in years, and that's what I want to talk about. It's also very different from previous Armored Core titles in its story and gameplay, which I'll also cover. Stick around if you haven't made a decision yet on whether to play the game, are here to criticize my takes in the comments, or are simply fiending for more of Rubicon's blessings. What's up gamers, it's Absurd here, and I've spent over 60 hours in Armored Core 6 so far, completing everything except the S ranks and a couple lore logs I'm still missing. I've got a lot to say about this game, more than I care to put in a single video, especially since the game has only been out for a week, and I want to save the spoilers for a bit later. Side note, before we get started, join my Discord if you want to help us build a compendium of all the data logs in the game. The lore community will surely appreciate your contribution, and the link will be in the description. Let's start with the base game element in every Armored Core game, the parts. With about 195 parts, if my counting is correct, I am an English major after all, that have unique stat blocks in the game, not counting the OST upgrades. Armored Core 6 has fewer parts than almost all of the Armored Core games, except for the first generation games. Granted, Armored Core 6 also has fewer part categories than previous titles, so it may be closer to a wash. I've never been much of a parts whore myself, so this didn't bother me too much. There is still a lot of variety for customization, but I did notice that many new parts were strictly upgrades of older parts, making the effective number of parts you might consider using a bit lower when it comes to endgame. My biggest complaint was the lack of support for machine guns, as I'm a lightweight close combat enjoyer and have mained machine gun builds in every other Armored Core game. The machine guns in Armored Core 6 leave a lot to be desired. The first thing I bought from the shop was a machine gun, but after the first mission I used it, I sold it back. The lack of machine gun support did encourage me though to branch out to different build types, which gave me a new and refreshing way to approach the game. I had expected to need to change my build quite a lot for each mission or boss fight based on the pre-launch interviews with the developers, but I was surprised that I was able to clear almost every single mission with only slight variations to what was essentially the same build for the whole game. Though it did take me a while to figure that build out and get the parts for it. No, I didn't use a dual minigun tank build. I've since seen many builds like that one that trivialize nearly the entire game, so the customization puzzle of solving each boss with a unique build didn't seem to hit as hard as FromSoft intended. The TLDR is that tanks, Gatling guns, shotguns, and needle launchers are all pretty overpowered. The part selection is one of the weakest aspects of this game compared to previous titles, but it still gets the job done. And to end on a positive note with regards to parts, I liked how From gives you tutorial missions that train you on new part types as they become available in the shop, and then give you some of those parts for free once you complete the training. Perfect onboarding. The tools for playing Fashion Core 6 are definitely a step up from previous titles, if a bit tedious to use. My very basic emblem took about 45 minutes to create. I've seen some real banger emblems out there though, and can't imagine the amount of work that was put into them. I was really hoping that the game would have an image upload function so we could use better third-party tools for creating emblems to use in the game, but it was wise for FromSoft to not trust a bunch of degenerate gamers with such power. You have to put in the work to earn your cock and balls emblem, my guy. The paint system and patterns are pretty typical of past Armored Core games, but the ability to paint your weapon parts or copy and paste a color scheme to distinct parts or even the whole AC is great quality of life. My main gripe with the fashion is that many of the parts just don't look right when you cobble them together into a build. It felt like optimizing my build for performance came at the sacrifice of fashion, which is not ideal, but ultimately it didn't impact my experience too much. Armored Core 6 offers more in the way of fashion than I'd ever actually use, which is very nice. The menus in the game are minimalist, which is a style choice that I respect. Most of the menus are pretty intuitive to find using on-screen prompts and the help function, although the menu option for viewing and selecting your hanger weapons was not obvious at all, at least to me. And once again, we are unable to buy and sell from the same menu or from the assembly screen, which means a lot of menu hopping, but it's not nearly as tedious as it was in all the previous Armored Core titles, like Armored Core 3, that required way more inputs for navigating menus to create a build than it does here in Armored Core 6. I really liked that the mission menu tells you which missions have combat logs you still need to collect, and I wish FromSoft had extended that feature to include the data logs and also hidden parts, to save us time in scouring maps that didn't contain any secrets in the first place. It also would have been nice to have a cutscene menu to collect and view all the cutscenes in the game, as some of them you only get access to while playing through the game. Something like the mail system in the older gen games that cataloged all the story bits would have been nice. Speaking of the cutscenes, they are the main vehicle for delivering the story of the game. I've seen quite a bit of hate for the story delivery in this game, and I honestly don't know what people expected. Armored Core games have always been like this. Mission briefs, radio chatter, and email logs that you use to piece together the whole story. Armored Core 6 actually improved a lot on this by including the data log system to deliver more lore in a way that incentivizes exploration of the maps and taking on optional combats. The story itself was not quite what I expected, which was refreshing in some ways and disappointing in others. I had worried that all my speculation videos might spoil the story for myself and viewers, but for the most part, that wasn't an issue. There were fewer active factions to engage with than in some previous Armored Core games. Previous games usually had a whole stable of corporations that you could take jobs for, typically at the expense of the civilian population. That wasn't as much of a theme in this game, with there only being two main corporations to work for, and not much of a civilian population to speak of, or oppress. That being said, moral ambiguity in the story still exists, just not in the way it existed in previous titles. Above Average Gaming noted in his video that the story felt more anime compared to the older games, and I agree. The gritty realism of old-gen Armored Core is exchanged for more fantasy elements in the gameplay and narrative in Armored Core 6. The dialogue and characters also embody more anime tropes than in previous titles, which I'll avoid elaborating on now for spoiler reasons. Overall, the story felt engaging and kept me asking questions about the world. I'm still trying to piece it all together and having a ton of fun doing it. There is a ton of story between the 3 separate endings. Make sure you play the game 3 times to get them all, and all of the data logs hidden in the missions. I loved that once I'd beaten the game the first time, there was still so much left to uncover about the mysterious happenings on Rubicon 3, including the vigorous New Games Plus and Plus Plus. That was one of my favorite aspects about Armored Core 4 Answer, and I'm so happy they approached Armored Core 6 in the same way. Whatever complaints I mentioned previously pale in comparison to how amazing this game feels to play. The debate between Souls-like or traditional Armored Core is moot. The game is wholly unlike either category, and takes the best of both worlds to develop a fast-paced and engaging combat and mission system that rivals any previous FromSoft game, be it Elden Ring or Armored Core 4 Answer. The concept of a stagger bar to create burst damage windows, while unlike previous Armored Core games, is a nice change to how we approach combat and makes stagger more intuitive. Stagger existed to a small extent in those old games, but was not something you could easily predict or play around as much as you can now in Armored Core 6. The supply points and repair kits are pretty immersion breaking, as there is no in-world explanation for how instant repair kits work, and the supply checkpoints telegraph every boss encounter, but both are sacrifices made to serve the gameplay. I'd probably still be on my first playthrough if it wasn't for these features. So rather than complain, I'll say thank you, FromSoft. This isn't the first AC game to have punishing boss fights that took me hours to beat, but where older boss fights were typically just overpowered ACs or outnumbered fights against a team of ACs, Armored Core 6 brings more diversity with its approach to boss fights, incorporating much of the old design with the new. This kept the game feeling familiar as an old AC fan, while bringing fresh design to the franchise. FromSoft gets another onboarding win in this regard as well, by putting you up against one of these new style bosses in the very first mission. Some people have called it a filter, but it's good design that trains you in aspects of the game that will be imperative to understand for progression later on. I'm not saying this as an elite gamer that one-shotted all the bosses. I spent 10 hours between 3 different early game bosses trying to get the kills. It was mostly me being too stubborn to quit out and buy better parts or to make slight build changes, but it was rough. So I empathize with any of you who experience similar struggles or who will bash your face into some of these bosses for a few hours. I just want you to know, you will kill it, and it will be worth it. Despite the punishing bosses, the overall gameplay is far less punishing than previous games. Debt is non-existent, which is a bit of a paradox considering our character is earning money to buy their life back, but whatever. Checkpoints make running missions far easier and faster than having to grind all the way through a mission for the 10th time just to attempt the boss again. It also means you can't fail a mission and have it drop off the job board like it would in the older gen games. The game is punishing, but it respects your time, which is super refreshing in today's gaming climate. The best thing about the gameplay though is how smooth it is. The game feels finished. I only encountered 2 bugs in 60 hours of play, and only one of them caused me to replay a mission. I asked the community about their experience in this regard, and my overall impression based on the comments is that the game runs exceptionally well compared to what people might expect with modern games in general. I couldn't be happier about that. I can't talk about this game without mentioning the music, which I think is fantastic. Every one of these tracks is one that I can jam to outside of the game, and their placement in the game does well at setting the tone for each mission. Above Average Gaming lamented the lack of banger tracks like what we had in previous games, specifically with regards to how a new track would start playing and an unknown AC would fly into frame and chills would run down your spine with anticipation of what was about to happen. I agree that those moments in Armored Core 6 did pale somewhat in comparison to similar moments in previous Armored Core games, but I was still so engaged with those narrative beats that I didn't even notice being disappointed at the time. It still hit hard. I often found myself noticing the music and being impressed by it while playing, despite music typically being designed to fuse into the overall ambience and be otherwise unnoticeable. If I ever notice background features like this, it's usually because they are bad or taking me out of the game somehow. I never felt that way with the music in Armored Core 6, and I'll be listening to this OST for years to come. And I'll have an honorable mention here for PvP. It exists, though I haven't played much more than an hour or 2 of it. My brother has played over 100 matches and told me all about his experiences, which have mostly been good aside from some balance issues. Until FromSoft implements some new balance regulations, I can't say I'll be itching for much PvP action outside of playing with channel members and patrons, but don't let that discourage you from giving it a try, especially if you tend to enjoy PvP in other games. Current PvP is deathmatch style with 1v1s or 3v3 teams, and I've just never been a big fan of deathmatch as a PvP format in other games. It would be cool to see objective-based formats implemented in the future by FromSoft or by the mod community. One thing I will say about my very short PvP experience is that we spent about as much time trying to form lobbies as we did actually playing the matches. So there was definitely room for improving the logistics of forming lobbies and teams for matches. But the PvP gameplay itself was surprisingly fun to me, despite being a deathmatch format that I'm not a huge fan of. I really shouldn't have been that surprised, since arena fights have always been one of my favorite parts of old Armored Core games. I'm definitely going to keep my eye on the PvP, as that is the main feature that will keep the Armored Core 6 community alive in the long term. Looking back now at all of my criticism, I'm noticing that the root of most of it comes by comparison to the older Armored Core games I grew up with. Comparison is the thief of joy, as they say. So don't compare it. In a vacuum, there is very little to dislike about Armored Core 6. It is an excellent game, worthy of Game of the Year. If you are an old AC vet disappointed in many of the changes to the franchise, enjoy Armored Core 6 for what it is, a fun game that runs smoothly and doesn't ask you to open your wallet beyond the box price. If you were on the fence about trying the game, I hope I've helped swing your decision in a healthy direction. Armored Core 6 is Armored Core enough for me. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel to catch all the Armored Core 6 content I'll be rolling out in the future. If you want to show financial support for my work, check out the Patreon and channel member links in the description. Every little bit will help me continue to improve what I'm doing. Until next time, Ravens, abide with Rubicon.